We don't usually see prairie as a biome or ecological entity unto itself, but a lack thereof. A blank canvas of nothingness. Nature's failure to adapt and create something meaningful among a host of flyover states. Unchanging, unmoving, and undisturbed. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The Great Plains sit at the center of North America, right in the collision zone of tropical air from the Gulf, dry air from the southwestern deserts, moist air from the Pacific, and frigid air from the Arctic. Rather than coming together into a moderate average between these regions, prairie embodies the extremes of the surrounding climates. Northern prairies are especially brutal, with winters getting as cold as -40 degrees Fahrenheit and summers reaching a sweltering 100. Individually, these winds create an incredible amount of variability in temperature, but together they comprise something much more violent. Dubbed Tornado Alley, the central portion of the US experiences more tornadoes than any other part of the world. Colliding wind fronts are frightening in their power to uproot and destroy. Along with creating tornadoes, they're capable of sending tropical air straight up into the atmosphere, where they'll release their humidity in the form of hail and torrential downpours. That may come as a surprise considering that prairie was not only the setting, but the driver for the Dust Bowl, one of the most severe and economically disastrous periods of drought in US history. But rain in the prairie is as infrequent as it is severe, with some parts of the Great Plains receiving a third of their annual precipitation in a single hour. So, along with being plagued with an almost desert-like dryness, prairie also suffers from bouts of nearly biblical precipitation. That's what really characterizes this environment. Change. Extreme change. Nothing here is constant. The volatile precipitation within prairie is the reason that brushstrokes of trees only seem to haphazardly be drawn onto an otherwise barren landscape, almost representing a forest that never truly materializes. Woodlands can't sustain themselves without a constant supply of water, but grasses are another story entirely, being much better at conserving moisture. That's why the Great Plains play host to over 140 different species. As impressive as their ability to adapt is, though, they're partly responsible for the negative image of prairie in our cultural consciousness. It's why we tend to think of prairie as nothing, seemingly devoid of life. We don't usually offer grass the distinction in our minds as a flora unto itself, relegating it to playing set dressing for other, more interesting environments. We only have that impression because we so often look in all the wrong places. The temperate grasslands that dominate Midwestern America are only the surface of a whole other world. Dipping beneath the ground, we find miles of roots that surpass the growth up above. This allows grass to grab moisture from a much greater distance, putting out feelers for hidden pockets of water hiding in small nooks and crevices. The branching fractals that comprise them are so numerous that it's hard to get a sense of their true length. In the mid-1930s, 1/2 square yard of prairie grass was found to contain 150 miles worth of roots. Prairie is a semi-arid environment, occupying its own niche between desert and forest. The grasses of Midwestern America have spent an incredible amount of time adapting to the drought that this environment so often suffers from. So what we perceive to be a barren landscape actually plays host to an underground network exponentially greater than what we normally see above. European settlers unfortunately didn't understand the ecology of the land, and instead chose to begin planting trees for a more traditional aesthetic. Along with a desire for greater visual appeal, they also removed a lot of the animals that called prairie home. Pronghorn, mule deer, wolves, and bears were once abundant across the Great Plains. And yes, bison as well, who have become a sort of mascot for this underappreciated habitat. A symbol for prairie that was once so abundant that in 1804, when Lewis and Clark made their infamous journey across America, the former stated, "I estimate the number of buffalo which could be comprehended at one view to amount to 3,000. And it took less than 100 years after that point for all free-roaming bison in the US to be killed off. Now, traditionally, we think of this as a tragedy past, with bison having made a huge comeback from the limited number of them held by a handful of ranchers and conservationists. They're only designated as near threatened on the IUCN list, and bison burgers have become a barely more expensive than cattle beef novelty item on menus all across the states. But what those facts hide are that the bison we see today aren't the bison of the past. 98.5% of all living bison in the world bear some history of hybridization with domestic cattle. You could argue that this isn't an issue, that these bison, regardless of their genetic composition, look and act enough like the real deal. But despite introducing cattle into the mix, the bison of today, full-blooded or otherwise, still aren't anywhere near their estimated 12 to 125 million pre-European contact population size. Domestic cattle still vastly outnumber them, and have also become the main herbivorous grazer on this landscape, occupying an ecological niche that bison left wide open. Though incredibly similar, they exhibit enough differences that disqualify them from being interchangeable. Bison have a falling reflex to ward off biting bugs and to scratch themselves, leading to natural depressions peppered over their habitat. Depressions that, during the infrequent but severe rainstorms, make small ponds that attract all manner of life on the prairie. Cattle, rather than providing a source of water, take it away. Bison don't exhibit the same attraction towards the shade that often accompanies river systems on the prairie. Cattle, on the other hand, have no reservations about stomping those riparian zones down into nothing. Eurasian cattle also aren't migratory. Fences draw clear boundaries for where they can live. Bison constantly move across the continent, following the path to greener pastures for that season. Many grasses are uniquely adapted to this kind of seasonal stress. Some are even more productive with occasional grazing than with no grazing at all. But that principle only holds when the stress comes in well-timed intervals, not a constant barrage of cattle subsisting on the same lands for years on end. That lack of understanding that's reflected in our agricultural practices also manifests itself as a lack of terminology, with the word prairie not even entering the English lexicon until the 1680s. Settlers, along with giving us the language, also established the cultural imagery we associate with prairie. We've almost come to believe that ranches and farms are a natural part of this landscape. Agriculture is so deeply interwoven into the DNA of what we think this land is. That bias creeps its way into conservation efforts as well. Portions of the Great Plains exceed the biodiversity of the rainforests of Northern California and the swamps of the Everglades. Yet less than 1% of prairie has any sort of environmental protection in the US. That may come as a surprise considering most of the large animals have long been extirpated. The prairie, despite making up only 10% of the waterfowl breeding habitat in North America, produces anywhere from 50 to 90% of all ducklings that fledge in any given year. This is on top of the fact that half of all shorebirds in North America can be found in the Great Plains, with many using it as a crucial stopover during migrations. Far from being dull and lifeless, the temperate grasslands of North America arguably exhibit more change than any other biome, riding waves and pulses of drought, storms, and migrations. Everything is in a constant state of flux, and there's so much more here than what meets the eye.